Episode 11, New Orleans and the Corps d'Afrique. Welcome back, everyone. And we're here again with the P.S. Gilmore story and specifically looking at New Orleans in the years 1863 and 1864 during the Civil War. Last week we saw a part of Gilmore's involvement again with the Union Army and the causes of the war. But we also saw how he wasn't interested in taking the easy road to retirement after his service in battle as part of the Burnside expedition. Let me remind you, these episodes are just mere tasters of the Gilmore story and his contribution to America in the Civil War. It's impossible to tell the complete story, but rest assured, I am trying. The next episode will also look at the black bands, their training, and specifically their importance in New Orleans. So please click like and subscribe to receive notifications of future episodes. Subscribe is that big red box below. Thank you. No, he had objected to the mustering out of the bands from the army by Lincoln. He also, however, did understand the reasons behind such a move and a need by the administration to save $4 million from the annual budget. During his many visits back to the Bay State, he met Governor Andrews, who was a staunch abolitionist, and future plans were obviously discussed. On one of these trips, Governor Andrews asked him to reorganize, the bands of Massachusetts, which was really code for training up black bands. And so after training the 1st Black Regiment, the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment in Camp Meigs, they went off to war and to a brutal military baptism in Fort Wagner. Later, when they returned in September 1863, they were also met by P.S. Gilmore. Meanwhile, Gilmore himself continued to train black musicians for other bands and other regiments. And as each regiment was created, then the band would be assigned to that regiment with the standard requirement of skill learned and attained. Because of time constraints, the bands were not necessarily ready for immediate performance to the public initially. But Gilmore was, and this is the only way I can explain it, he was in essence mass-producing bands for regiments at this stage. An example of a band that wasn't ready for the public was actually the 54th Massachusetts band, because for that parade in Boston, that band did not perform. They would continue to get trained by someone from New York later on. Later, as their practice and skill levels, however, improved, they would prove to be a major piece of local propaganda amongst the slave population in the South, in their fine uniforms, carrying polished brass instruments, and playing beautiful music. However, one example of an exceptionally trained bunch of musicians resulted from a request by General Nathaniel Banks of the state of Louisiana, or as it was known then, the Department of the Gulf. Banks had known Gilmore as a former politician and also governor of Massachusetts. Now both leaders in Louisiana, that is General Banks and General Butler, they had acquired control of the recently freed state of Louisiana, and they needed to build their military reserve up in this vital state against the Confederacy. Banks chiefly saw the value in Gilmore's work in Massachusetts and asked him to reorganize the bands of Louisiana. Again, there was no mention of any training of black bands or indeed of black regiments earlier on. After all, there was no need to preempt a situation or indeed to forearm the Confederate sympathizers in the state of such developments. However, General Banks had now placed Gilmore in charge of all the bands and the music in the Department of the Gulf in the war, and after the departure of the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, Gilmore remained in Camp Meigs, training musicians and bands. Meanwhile, a new Black Regiment was being prepared, called the Corps d'Afrique. And by December the 23rd, according to the New York Times, this regiment arrived in Port Hudson under the orders of General Andrew. 3 weeks later, Gilmore would arrive with musicians, leaving his own Gilmore's band to rehearse, perform, and raise awareness in Boston in his absence. However, the arrival of P.S. Gilmore and his talented musicians were noted in many newspapers separately. Here are some examples. January the 16th, 1864, New Orleans Era newspaper. Mr. P.S. Gilmore, the well-known and accomplished band leader, arrived here this morning by the steamer Mississippi, having in charge 2 bands which he had organized and trained for General Andrews' division at Port Hudson. This afternoon, he will give a concert on the grounds surrounding the residence of General Banks at Coliseum Square. January the 17th, same newspaper. A splendid band of about 30 instruments for the Corps d'Afrique of this department came to the city on the steamer Mississippi under the control of Gilmore. At noon, they play at headquarters, and at 3 o'clock, at General Banks' residence, to a large and delighted assemblage of ladies and gentlemen. January the 23rd, the Evening Telegraph, and this was in Pennsylvania. Amongst papers throughout the nation, they reported the same story, that Gilmore brought 2 black bands to New Orleans, and elsewhere in the same paper, I quote, it lists P.S. Gilmore and says, 32 in steerage belonging to a band for General Andrews. Note that the steerage was the lowest class on any ship of that time. The article I mentioned from the January the 17th Era newspaper of the arrival of the 30 instruments and the concert at General Banks' residence. I'm just going to give you a thought. You may agree or disagree with me as you wish. Imagine the fear and the trepidation of these newly trained musicians who, for the first time in their lives, and actually their music, they're playing to a completely white audience other than servants present. These were the first trained, to my knowledge, in notation, instrumentation, and composition in the history of black bands. The details of the concert are not available, but this clearly would also have been the first time that a band of 30 to 32 instruments would have been viewed by a white audience. At this moment in time, by the way, I should also point out that the band that we're talking about was now being reported in the press locally as Gilmore's band, rather than the band of the Corps d'Afrique. The first promenade concerts in New Orleans, January the 21st, were introduced by P.S. Gilmore. January the 21st, an agreeable entertainment will take place on Monday evening next at the new Opera House in Bourbon Street under the auspices of some of the most distinguished military gentlemen, assisted by leading gentlemen including Creole, and American. The character of the entertainment will be somewhat novel, but is very popular in other large cities under the names of Promenade Concerts. The music department will be under the direction of Mr. Gilmore, one of the most successful leaders in this country. January the 23rd in Pennsylvania reports again that Gilmore is bringing 2 black bands to New Orleans. January the 24th mentions that little Clara Fisher will give her farewell concert at Lyceum Hall on Friday evening, assisted by Gilmore's celebrated band and several gentlemen of high musical reputation will accompany him. And on the same day, the Grand Promenade concert program is published on January the 26th, with military band playing a grand march from La Sanambulla with vocalist Clara Fisher, Miss Georgina Oliveira, and Mr. C. Shelby from the Varieties Theatre. Selections from the military band will include a waltz, a polka, and the last number is by a military band with grand finale, The Soldiers' Return March. Gilmore introducing his popular song, When Johnny Comes Marching Home Again. And so, on the 28th, continuing on, the serenade concert Gilmore's band will give every day is increasing in popularity. Last evening serenaded General Banks and General Lee. February the 2nd, Gilmore furnished the music for the occasion of the first regular infantry inspection in Lafayette Square in New Orleans. And February the 3rd, in the New Orleans era, entitled Good Medicine for the Sick. Last evening, by the courtesy of Mr. Gilmore and his mammoth band, the invalided soldiers at St. Louis Hospital were treated to a prescription of music. For a band with so little training, this performance cannot be exaggerated or praised too much for its execution. We have rarely heard Departed Days played with more smoothness and expression than at the concert alluded to. Mr. Gilmore would by no means rest his musical reputation upon the degree of proficiency which these students of his attained. He certainly, however, has no reason to be ashamed of them. Gilmore's band, it should be emphasized, was still in Boston. Elsewhere, it was reported that Colonel Kay, one of the commissioners appointed by the War Department into the question of employing, enlisting, and educating Negroes, arrived from New York on the Morning Star. That report had to be one of the first performances of a black band before white soldiers in any part of the war. February the 4th, the usual festivities of Mardi Gras will be allowed in this city. February the 6th, presentation of the battle flag to Colonel Dudley's brigade, presented by General Banks' older daughter, with music from Gilmore's band in front of the Henry Clay statue in the city. February the 10th, cavalry view in Greenville, just below Carleton. Brigadier General A.L. Lee on Mardi Gras afternoon. Gilmore's splendid band has taken its station and was assisted on its musical duties by a fine cavalry band of the 1st Brigade, mounted on white horses. February the 11th, the second series of promenade concerts at the new Opera House came off last evening and was a greater success than the first. Gilmore's band furnished the music and all the vocalization was dispensed with, nor was its absence felt very seriously. The arrangements were much more complete in every respect than before, and the company seemed to be on a more familiar and sociable footing. February the 16th. Gilmore's band in the lead. The procession to the river of the homeward bound 2nd Illinois Cavalry had a review at the Clay statue. So, in conclusion, there is little doubt that Gilmore enjoyed New Orleans as a city, complete with rich culture, diverse beliefs, and a melting pot of so many tastes of the exotic. But New Orleans also gave Gilmore the opportunity to express himself in so many ways and to develop the opportunity afforded him to help the Black Regiments gain acceptance amongst a society that wasn't always ready to accept them to their bosom with open arms. In summary of Gilmore's appointments during the Civil War, he had in August 1862 been asked by Governor Andrews to reorganize the bands of Massachusetts. Between August and September of 1862, he had assumed the responsibility of training the black bands of Massachusetts. In June of 1863, he was appointed General Recruiting Officer for the musical department of the Massachusetts Volunteers by Governor Andrews. Between June and September 1863, he was asked by General Nathaniel Banks to reorganize the bands of the Department of the Gulf. And in his own concert program, Artists of the Jubilee Tour in 1889, Gilmore wrote that General Banks placed him in charge of all the bands and music in the Department of the Gulf during the war. In essence, P.S. Gilmore was now the unofficial Bandmaster General of the Union Army during the Civil War. If you've enjoyed this documentary and want to hear more of the Civil War story of P.S. Gilmore and his contribution in the war, please subscribe. Also, please comment below. Coming next week, Gilmore would organize a party of all parties for the Union in New Orleans. Thank you for your attention. Click subscribe. Thank you. Bye-bye.